Thanks, Simo. Well, China is on a charm offensive, playing up its U.S. business ties ahead of President Trump's visit here. The Foreign Ministry today put out a video that highlights Apple as well as Tesla as good examples of businesses here. Of course, those two companies on a list, on the invite list for those CEOs to join President Trump when he travels here. That list features companies that benefit, such as Apple, but also companies that have suffered because of the competition and deterioration of U.S.-China ties. Micron and Illumina, for example, both targets of Chinese retaliation. Visa and Citi, historically restricted from market access. Qualcomm is the latest to confirm that it is going to be joining. Cisco says that its CEO won't join. NVIDIA is not on that list. Despite the concerns over Iran, the primary focus is very likely going to be about business deals and trade issues. A lot of that, the expectation is about Chinese purchases of Boeings as well as big agricultural purchases. But what is unclear is whether or not this summit is going to address some of the other longstanding issues and some of the newer ones that the business community is worried about. In fact, on the eve of President Trump's visit, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce flagged a report that they are very concerned about China's next phase of industrial policy, which they say could be even more pernicious, and what they describe as the industrial policy of everything, embedding China in global supply chains and having a lot of different dangers and risks to industry as well as jobs back home. Guys?
Eunice, I've also heard that President Trump is expected to bring up Iran in these conversations with President Xi Jinping. What could stop China from providing their support when it comes to Iran?
Well, I think that the Chinese would have to see that it's within their interest to support Iran. So, of course, the immediate interest is, yes, they would want to have stability in Hormuz because of the trade. Also, there is some impact when it comes to their energy security. But longer term, when they look at the remaking of the order in the Middle East, it's within their longer-term interest, not necessarily to help the U.S. and to make sure that the U.S. is kind of burdened with different problems. So longer term, it's not necessarily within their interest, and that's really the big question for them.
Eunice, we've been talking this morning about the fact that a large contingent of U.S. CEOs does not include Jensen Huang. And I'm just curious as to whether there are any insights you might be able to offer as to why that might be the case, or whether the Chinese might say, don't bring them.
Well, in terms of the official Chinese response, there's been no comment or insight there, but definitely a lot of Chinese people like you have been very curious about why the Jensen Huang wasn't included. And we had already been hearing from Jensen Huang to Jim Cramer when he had said that it would be his great honor, and this was, more recently, to be joining the list of CEOs if he were, in fact, invited. He wasn't invited, and so the way that that's being understood here is that perhaps U.S. policy towards advanced chips hasn't changed, and the other signal that it's sending here is that NVIDIA might not get the sales that it needs, and its recovery in this market might necessarily be there.